We are renewing our focus on government's national reading sector strategy. It was launched in 2015, and essentially it was created to provide a framework to improve reading and literacy in the country. There have been some setbacks caused mainly by COVID-19 on the project. And if you look at the 2021 Pearls results, it showed that 81% of grade 4 learners still couldn't read for meaning in the country, almost exactly the same proportion as in 2011. And what it means is that almost a decade of slow progress had been wiped out. Government's efforts, in the meantime, have been called into question. And there is a ground-up study deeming the National Reading Plan a serious failure from a planning, implementation and monitoring perspective, warning of long-term consequences to the current country's development because of this. But we talk now to National Education Collaboration Trust CEO Dr. Godwin Khosa to evaluate progress in these strategic plans to address these problems and to accelerate interventions. Good evening and welcome to you, Dr. Khosa. You have for years now been on a crusade, on a mission to get South Africans to read. How do you feel when you assess where we are in terms of your objective, especially when it concerns children who are missing out, it would seem, on a proper foundation at school?
Well, good evening, Iman and the listeners. We have lost some ground, as the Pearls results have shown. And there are a number of reasons that are being provided or explanations. But I think what's important is to pick up the lessons and process them into further, steps that have to be taken in the future to make sure that our kids are able to read with a sense of meaning.
Well, again, the Pearls study was a moment for us to sort of reckon with ourselves. Those numbers are quite stark, and experts such as yourselves know better than anyone else that if we miss this window of opportunity to get it right, it's very hard to make up that ground. So let's shift our focus a little bit, even though it encompasses this problem, progress in the national reading sector strategy.
So the first strategy, as you mentioned earlier on, was put together in 2015. It's a strategy that the government and its partners, including ourselves, have been pursuing for those years throughout the COVID period, where the interface between learners and teachers was completely cut off for an extended period of time. So that would have cost a loss of ground in that respect. But we are continuing to assist government and its partners to put together a strategy that should ensure that learners read with meaning. So in the past couple of months, we've gotten experts, talking about where the gaps are, both in terms of the reading, levels, and also in terms of the plans and the implementation of the plans that will get the learners to read. That group of experts and stakeholders in the sector have actually agreed on 4 areas that we all have to focus on to improve reading. And the first of those is policy. Policy experts have sat and looked at what's important to put in policy to make sure that the kids read. The second one is how we do get to do teacher development of the over 450,000 teachers who are responsible for actually interfacing with the learners and teaching them how to read. The third is improving the provision of LTSM, Learner Teacher Support Material. At the core of that is materials for learners to read. And those have to be pitched at the right level in all the languages so that they're able to read, progressively. The last of those is actually mobilizing parents and communities to reinforce the importance of reading in that space. So there's lots of lessons that have been taken, from the previous period. Amongst those is the need for greater focus on African languages, which has been less of a focus in the previous period. And you know that Pearls has been testing our learners' reading capabilities in African languages instead. The second is to ensure upstream alignment from universities to planning in the departments and the districts to make sure that whatever has to be done indeed is done and it reverberates down to the classroom level. The third, and I think quite important, is to expand the need for intervention from just reading to literacy. And the difference is that if you're going to teach learners to read with meaning, you got to approach it as literacy, which includes teaching them how to write, teaching them how to speak, and ensuring that they understand as they read, because just reading out the words has proven not to actually cut it, in the past.
Yeah.
Lastly, the need for bankable plans to ensure that all these policies and intentions are resourced and they actually happen at every level.
Dr. Khosa, in the words of our one-time Gauteng education MEC, beautiful, beautiful, because he used to love to say that. And these sound great. The concern, I imagine, a lot of parents, education experts would express tonight is, again, we are constantly in the planning and refinement phase, while at the same time we are losing time and we don't have any control over extraordinary events like COVID-19. Again, happy that you talked about, home languages and so on, because, there's a preservation of language and culture that's all very good for society. But what are the urgent things that we need to do now, and how are you bringing in all of the stakeholders, the actual teachers, the education communities very closely with you, so that when you make a decision, you can execute almost immediately some of the gaps that you need to address with urgency?
When you deal with big systems, one of the dangers that you have to avoid is to go off and implement solutions that are not, suitable and proven. So in the past 3 years, we worked with the department to develop African language teaching material, targeting teachers in all the 9 African languages. And those were developed in the context where you can't copy from one language to the other because languages are different. So we now have developed that material and it's available to the system. What's left is to roll that out. We need a plan, I agree, but there's lots of low-hanging fruits. We need quick wins. So all the 2,000 to 3,000 subject advisors who are responsible for overseeing reading improvement in the country must be trained almost immediately and be sent out to go and help their own teachers. And then plans must be made for teachers to be brought on board on how to teach reading or literacy in African, languages. Build energy behind that. Let's continue with the monitoring and bring the monitoring of reading closer to home, closer to each of the 9 African languages, which are peculiar in their own right, to understand where the gaps are and how to close those gaps.
Yeah.
So those are some of the quick wins that we shouldn't wait. We should get down to work to complete as soon as possible.
Well, we'll watch and bring our viewers developments and updates in the execution of that strategy, and also monitor some of the impact and progress. Thank you for talking to us tonight. We appreciate your time.